army in Europe, that leaving the EU could endanger the NATO alliance?
Well, I just don't accept that at all, and I have to say that I find it incredibly unhelpful when we hear US politicians and US figures, and actually figures from all over the world, trying to tell the British people what to do. We know that President Obama has a very strong view on these matters, but look, I would never seek to tell the US electorate who they should be voting for in the US election. I wouldn't say whether they should vote for Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, Hillary Clinton, or whatever. And actually...
But why shouldn't they give their view when they are an ally of the United Kingdom, and if they have a view on it, it's not telling the British people what to do, it's saying this is what we think. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think this is a decision that the British people and the British people alone should take. And we're hearing a lot of scare stories at the moment. The reality is that Britain would still be part of the G7, we'd still be in the G20, we'd still be very pivotal within NATO, the UN, we'd still have that special relationship. These are all things that I don't believe would change very much at all. And I think that my constituents and people across the country would say that the European Union has very little to do with our security arrangements, that, for example, it's NATO that has kept the peace in Europe since the Second World War. Those are the things that we ought to be focusing on, and I just don't accept what this US figure has said.
It will, of course, be the British people alone who will vote in the referendum, but he has said that the outcome is of strategic interest to the United States. So it's an element that has to be factored in, isn't it?
I don't think so at all. The reality is that we would still have a seat at the top table of international affairs. We would still engage with our European partners. We would still engage with partners across the world. That certainly wouldn't change were we to vote to leave on the 23rd of June.
The common security threats to the EU nations currently, terrorism and ISIS, and what Russia is doing right now. Is the UK not stronger within the EU in tackling that? I mean, that's obviously the argument that Stay campaign would say.
I don't think any of that would change. Obviously, we would still have very strong relationships with other European countries, and as I say, with countries across the world. We've got intelligence services that lead the world in the work that they do. They have a huge impact on the global fight against terrorism, and that just wouldn't change. We would still
What about something like the European arrest warrant?
Well, look, I just think that the reality is that we could organise those sorts of agreements bilaterally with other countries very, very quickly. None of that would change were we to vote to leave. And one of the frustrations about all of this is that the renegotiation that we saw does not address the fundamental concerns that the British people have got. We send £350 million a week to Brussels that we can spend on our own public services. We've got a situation where we have uncontrolled immigration into this country that in itself poses some security concerns, and we've also got an immigration system that doesn't treat people equally from across the world. If you come from the Commonwealth or from America, for example, you are treated differently than if you come from within the European Union. And I want Britain to be a global facing nation that can sign its own trade agreements, that can work with countries across the world, that can have beneficial trading relationships, not just for us, but also with countries in the developing world, for example.
Tom Pursglove, thank you.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.